Welcome. I'd really appreciate if you could drop a comment with your thoughts and reactions as you listen. Your feedback helps me craft better stories for you. Mia and I were never like other kids our age. Where others had competition, we had friendship. Where they kept secrets, we were open and honest. The nights in our small town were full of shared whispers and dreams that made up our youth. She was my friend and the one who would jump into the world with both feet, her pen stronger than any sword. It's been a while since I saw her. She was hunched over her laptop, and the screen was a hazy blue. She told him, "This is big, Ethan," with a voice that was both scared and excited. "The dark web is deeper than any of us knew, and I'm on to something huge." I didn't fully understand. I knew the dark web was a dangerous spot where the worst people in the world like to hang out. But Mia was brave. She was a reporter who was drawn to the truth like a moth to a flame. I should have known it was dangerous and told her, but I believed she could not be hurt. It had been days and weeks since she had spoken. Calls went right to voicemail, and emails were still not answered. The cops were sorry. But they couldn't do anything because the digital trail had been erased. As I clung to the last few things I had, the silence became unbearable and seemed to make fun of my despair. I looked at her laptop, which she watched over like a dragon with its gold. It was very hard to break, but Mia had taught me how to do it. I finally got through after days of trying over and over again. What I found was a Pandora's box full of horrible things. There were files and files of investigations, interviews, and exposes on the worst parts of human evil. There were movies and chats that made my blood run cold and my stomach hurt. Mia had been going through a maze of monsters, and her light of truth was about to shine on them. After that, nothing. The trail ended quickly, and her last file was a mess of numbers and names that were hard to understand. The understanding hit me like a ton of bricks, and I sat back. Mia was gone into the darkness she was trying to bring to light. Her light hadn't gone out, though. It had come to me. That's when I knew what to do. For Mia, for the truth, and for the hope that wouldn't go out. With her results and my determination in hand, I would plunge into the abyss. I was going to finish what she began. I would also shut down the dark web. The light from my computer screen stood out in the dark. It was the only light in the early hours of the morning. The files that Maya left behind became my path to the underworld and the abyss she fell into. I couldn't get rid of the images, the screams, and the cold deals I saw. This was more than just a story. There were a lot of shadows everywhere, and Mia had been trying to stop them. It's called Lumina, which means light that shines through darkness. Coding it became my only goal, and I spent all of my free time making this digital sword. I spent hours going over lines of code and making formulas that could break through the layers of anonymity that people on the dark web used to hide themselves. Lumina was made to find the horrible things that lived in the dark and bring them into the bright light of day. It was like going through a nightmare when I tested Lumina. I saw things no one should have seen and heard pleas that will always bother me. I discovered markets for the evil, sites for the evil, sites for the sick, and chats that talked about horrible things that happened to me. Somewhere in the trash, though, I found patterns in digital traces that led me to the real people behind the computer names. Each finding was a win, but it was also a step toward being more evil. I was finding out the worst things about people, and it was driving me crazy. But Mia's voice and drive pushed me to keep going. I couldn't let her work go to waste. I couldn't let her disappearance become just another case that was never solved and sat on a detective's desk collecting dust. When Lumina was almost done, I could feel how heavy what I was about to do was. This program has the power to destroy lives and reveal secrets that some people would kill to keep hidden. I had been threatened, and there were shadowy shapes just outside the porch light. But I couldn't afford to be afraid. I had to finish this for Mia and all the victims who hurt in silence and in the dark. The night I chose to let Lumina go, the air was thick with the smell of a storm. I was sitting at my desk, waiting for the enter key to set off my anger. I pressed it and let Lumina go into the world after taking a deep breath. As soon as Lumina went live, the rain stopped and the thunder made my heart beat faster. It was done by me. I had turned on the light. I had to wait to see what came out of the dark next. As Lumina crept through the web, there was a deep silence that made it feel like the calm before a disaster. What I saw on my screens, many feeds with data, names, and faces, were all being pulled into the light. The first news stories were shocked, with titles screaming of a huge Darkweb leak. My email account was full of messages. Some were thank yous, and others were desperate cries for help. I felt like a hero for a short time. I imagined Mia being happy and proud of her work, but the feeling was short-lived. It disappeared like fog when the first news of suicides came in. They were the ones whose sins were shown and who couldn't live with that. Lumina wasn't just code. Each report was a gut punch that made me remember that. And with each life lost, I could feel the weight of my obligation suffocating me. I asked for justice. Not this. Not a line of bodies, each with a sad story. Then I got the call that would always remind me of that day. Mark has been my best friend since we were kids and someone I could talk to about everything. After Mia went missing, the speaker on the other end was cold and impersonal. Mark had been found dead in his room because Lumina wouldn't stop telling the truth. He had been a user and often went to the dirty bazaars on the dark web. Mark was someone I knew, but not at all. The news broke my heart. The person who helped me get through Mia's death was killed by the tool I made to find justice for her. The irony stuck in my throat like a bitter pill, reminding me all the time of how much my cause had cost. As the number of deaths rose, so did the anger. The people who had once praised me now looked at me with anger in their eyes. I was looked down upon because I planned a digital cleanup that no one had asked for. Everyone had their say, the media, the families of the dead, and the nameless people on the internet, but no one spoke up for me. That day ended at the grave of my sister, where the gray sky and I both cried. I said sorry to the wind, Mia, and Mark in a whisper. While I had meant to show the evil, I had instead become its agent and a killer. When I got home at night, the house felt less full than it had before. I sat in the dark, and the only sounds were my short, loud breaths in my email, constantly beeping. Among the hate and threats, one message stood out. Do you want to know the truth about Maya? It was just a string of numbers. It was a lifesaver thrown into the rough sea of my hopelessness. I held on to it because I didn't know if it would pull me out of the depths or throw me further down. After that, the days were a blur of cameras, flashing and pointed questions. People in the media saw me as an activist gone bad, a hacker who broke the law and caused terrible problems. From behind closed blinds, I saw everyone talk about my life, my work, and my plans. They didn't get it. They were unable to. It wasn't about getting famous or getting even. It was about Mia and doing what was right. The police came to my door with warrants in hand, and their eyes were cold and uncaring. They went through my life like a fine tooth comb, taking computers, files, and anything else that could connect me to the chaos Lumina had caused. Friends turned their backs on me and crossed the street to avoid being seen as weird. I was by myself, except for the ghosts of what I had done. In the storm, the word about Mia was a bright light. I clung to it like a tether because it promised answers, or maybe an end to the questions that were bothering me. I went back to the dark web and followed the clues that the unidentified sender had left behind. I had nothing to lose. It took me deeper and darker than anywhere else I'd been on the web, to places that Lumina hadn't been. I found her, Maya, in a secret website where people talked in code and whispers. Not in person, but through a message and a movie that was already made. Even though her eyes looked the same, the fire that had been in them was gone. Since she wasn't a reporter, she talked about the dark web as if she were locked up, because she dug too deep. She found facts that were not meant to be seen. She paid the price for that. She was lost in a maze, but Mia's message helped her find her way out. She talked about a network, a shadow group that worked on the dark web where the law and morals couldn't reach it. They took her and used her skills for their own gain because they saw her promise and courage. She was still living, but she wasn't free. At the end of the film, she made a plea, and her voice broke as she said my name. She told Ethan, "Don't look for me. It's not safe enough. They are all over the place and are watching. Please know that I love you and am sorry." After the screen went dark, I had to make a decision. I could listen to her advice and walk away from the mess my life had become, or I could fight. Mia was somewhere out there, and the thought of her being slain by monsters made me strong. I erased everything on my hard drives, did my best to leave no digital trace, and got ready. What if Mia got lost in the maze? I would be the thread that led her out. I lost everything on the dark web, but I wouldn't let it take her. But not without fight. At the end of the story, I walk into the dark as a brother, not as a victim or a hero. The dark web reached a huge area, but I was determined to stay strong. This journey began with Maya, and I would end it for her, for Mark, and for everyone else who had suffered in the dark and silent. The world did not end in a loud or quiet way. At the end, there was a chorus of groans and the smell of rot that wouldn't go away. It's been 3 years. 3 years have passed since the virus ripped through our country, leaving behind empty towns and dead bodies that came back to life. I'm alive, which is a lot more than most people can say. As an MT, I used to save lives. Now, I'm just trying to keep a few other people and myself from becoming roaming dead. We're stuck in a place that used to be a small mountain town, the kind of spot that you'd miss if you closed your eyes on the highway. There's been safety there, but there's also been jail time. We are not in the military. We are just survivors. There's me, the medic. Jackson, who has been on 2 foreign tours and is now our unofficial leader. Sarah, the mechanic whose hands are always oily. And Zoe, the young scientist who thinks she can save the world. Michael is the next one. We're going to risk everything because of him. You might think Michael is just another survivor if you didn't know any better because he is quiet and stays to himself. He's not, though. He's the only person we know of who has been bitten and lived to tell the tale without turning into one of those things. He's our golden ticket, the only thing that can save us from this nightmare. The last virus lab in the country is hundreds of miles away, and they've been blasting over and over again, asking for people who have been exposed and lived. We need to get Michael there. We only have long shots left, so it's a long shot. We've spent weeks getting ready, finding a running car, planning the least dangerous routes, and hopefully collecting enough supplies to make it through the trip. Not only the dead are dangerous, but so are the living. People who are still alive are now fighting with each other out of desperation. We can't afford to trust anyone, but we're about to give the fate of all people to a man we barely know. I can't sleep the night before we leave. The howling wind outside is a scary reminder of how nature doesn't care about our situation. I can't help but stare at Michael, who is sitting alone and gazing into the fire. I don't like something about him. He is immune to everything, but it's not just that. It's something about the way he moves and talks. He has something to hide. I can tell. But what do we have to do? We get our stuff together and leave as soon as dawn breaks. It feels like any other morning for a moment, because the air is so fresh. Almost there. As we leave the safety of our mountain hideaway, though, the real world starts to hit us again. The roads are broken and overgrown. It's very quiet, and every shadow looks like it could hide a death sentence. We're a cloud of hope in a world that doesn't have any more. When angels don't want to go, we're the fools who rush in. But we have to take any chance that we can turn things around, no matter how small. For the people we've lost, the people who are still alive, and the world that used to be. I take one last look at the place that has been our home as we drive away. I don't think we'll make it to the lab, or that Michael's blood holds the key. I also don't think I'll ever come back. I do know one thing, though. The dead may have received Earth, but we're not ready to give it up yet. The road is a winding, scary path, and with each mile we go, the dead get a tighter grip on us. We've been moving for days, and the world outside our noisy car is a blur of empty spaces. The places we drive through are like cemeteries for the past, and the cities are like tombs for the dead. Michael is sitting next to me, and he looks off into the middle distance a lot. It's like he's looking for a sign of the life we used to have, but there's nothing outside, nothing left of a world that the end of the world chewed up and spit out. Jackson drives with a hard focus, but I can see Michael in the rearview mirror where his eyes dart. Sarah and Zoe are in the back with their guns ready. The engine's growl makes it hard to hear what they are saying. Though we work together, there are a lot of fears that aren't being said. When we get to what used to be a small town, it's our first real test. It's a terrible irony that the map calls it hope. We need to look for supplies, but as we get closer, the only sound we can hear is the clear moans of the dead. They're still here, stumbling through the streets with bodies that look nothing like the people they used to be. With an easy plan, we park on the edge and walk in. We'll get what we need and then leave. But even the best, laid plans often fail when this new truth comes up. As soon as we step outside, the smell of death fills the air, and the groans get louder. As a group, we move, taking careful steps and getting our guns ready. But you can find them everywhere. There are more people fighting than us, and it's terrible. When we kill one, it seems like two more appear to take its place. Limbs are cut off, and heads are crushed. Michael turns into a force we've never seen before in the chaos. He fights so fiercely that it chills you to see his hands and face covered in the dark blood of the dead. It does work, but it's also wrong. Even when the last zombie falls, the twinkle in his eye doesn't go away. We get what we can, but the experience has scared us. The silence in the car is alive as we drive off. That Michael seemed almost at home in the chaos is something that no one wants to talk about. That night, we camp in a barn that has been left empty. The alarm goes off, and one by one, we try to get some rest. But I don't know how to sleep anymore. As I lay awake and listen to the sounds of the night, I can't get rid of the thought that someone is after us. I hear it while I'm on duty, a soft rustling outside. My heart is beating fast as I look into the darkness and see them. Nobody but people. Not zombies. They are survivors like us. But there's nothing nice about the way they act. They want what we have so badly that they're ready to kill. It's a quick, bloody, and unavoidable fight. We're not the same polite people who looked down on violence in the past. We're animals in a tight spot, and we'll do anything to stay alive. The thieves are dead, and we have to deal with the weight of what we've done. We bury the dead in silence as dawn comes up. No one is giving a speech or praying, just the sound of wood being hit by dirt. When Michael helps, it seems like he's not really there. He's just doing it. The farmhouse is now just a dot in our rearview mirror as the sun rises, but the light of the day doesn't make things better. It only makes the blood on our clothes and the grimace on our faces stand out more. In a world full of decay, the lab is a safe haven, a bright light of hope. Now that we're close, I can almost taste the clean air. However, as we get closer, the air feels heavy, as if the whole world is holding its breath. Michael has been getting worse. The first sound was a soft cough that he tried to hide, but as the days went by, it was impossible to run away from. He's pale. His eyes are sunken and his hands are shaking, which shows that he's going through a lot inside. We've all seen it, but Jackson is the one who finally talks to him about it. We are camped out in an empty factory as night falls, and Jackson grabs Michael by the collar and throws him against the wall. "What's wrong with you?" he asks, his voice a low growl of doubt. Michael's secret comes out like a cut. He doesn't just not get sick, he also spreads it. He has a different bug that has changed. As the spread grew, he found a stash of antivirals that he has been taking. But now, his supply is running out. Everyone in the group lets out a gasp. Zoe's face shows that she feels betrayed, and Sarah's shows that she is scared. A cold fear spreads through my body. It's been like we've been moving with a time bomb. The moral dilemma hits us hard. The plan is the only way to find a cure. Should we give up on it? Do we leave Michael behind even though he is dangerous? He has become one of us. People are yelling and pointing their fingers in the argument. But the plan wins in the end. We need to get better. It's what people need. Michael must have it. We can't ignore him just yet because he's one of us. We keep going. The lab is now only a day's trip away. Michael's health gets worse, and the times he is aware quickly pass. His body is at war with itself, and he's not the same person we met. It can be seen that the lab is there. Michael falls down and starts shaking. We rush to help him, but we can't do anything. The virus is taking over, and his body is changing in an awful way that makes us stand back in shock. Sarah is yelling, Zoe is crying, and Jackson is quiet and has his gun out. We no longer know Michael. Something else, something dangerous, is there in his place. It's something I do. Jackson's hand is steady in my hand as we point the gun at Michael's head. While we pull the trigger, my voice says, "I'm sorry." The sound is so loud that it hurts my ears, and I can hear how final it is. We walk slowly toward the lab, our steps heavy with the weight of what we've done. When the doors open, fresh air rushes in. They promise to use Michael's blood to make the vaccine after they take his body. I can't help but wonder if it was worth it as I watch them wheel him away. The people who died and the things they gave up. I'm not the same person I used to be. I feel empty. Now that our goal is over, but at what cost? I have turned into a killer in a world with no room for kindness. I cry for the first time in what seems like a long time as I lay down to rest in the lab's halls. For Michael, for us, and for all people. Even though it's quiet outside, there's a storm going on inside. I don't know how much longer we can take it. The lab was meant to be the end goal, the result of all the risks we took and the worst dreams we had. Still, as I stand here with the cold gun barrel against my skull, I understand that this was always going to be the end game. Brutal, unforgiving, and final. Michael quickly changed into someone else. In one moment, he was a person, and in the next, he was a growling animal with eyes that were so hungry they hurt. Even though we thought we were ready, nothing could have made us ready for this. The lab techs are the first to fall. They were the ones who brought hope. Michael cuts off their screams as he rips through them. His virus-filled spit turns them into what we fear the most. The disease spreads like flames, and Safe Place turns into a burning house. Jackson, Sarah, and Zoe all look at me with scared and desperate looks in their eyes. The dead stand between us and the only way out. I feel the weight of the gun in my hand, which is both a curse and a gift. When I tell them to run, they hesitate for a moment before they get it. I'm not going with them. This is my stand, what I'm giving up. When I fire, the sound fills the room and is hard to hear. Michael turns, but his moves are jerky and not human. It's not enough when the bullet hits him right in the chest. It's not enough. Right away, he's on me with his teeth bared and ready to rip my skin apart. I fight because emotions and the basic need to stay alive drive me. But I know it's no longer about me, even though I'm having a hard time. The other people and the blood sample from Michael that could lead to a fix are important. I get him to move back, and with all the strength I still have, I scream for his friends to leave. They do. They run away, leaving me alone with this man, eating monster. The gun is thrown across the floor and then picked up again. I lost my knife in the fight. It's just me and my raw hands against Michael, who is a natural force that won't stop. When he bites me, I can feel the terrible pain of my imminent death. But I fight. Even though the virus starts to take over, I fight because of all the people we've lost and the hopes and dreams that have been dashed. It was only minutes long, but it seems like a long time. The last blow that Michael took was so hard that it caved in his head. I'm by myself, and the pain of my wounds is a grim warning of what's to come. I can hear the other people outside, running away. They got through it. I pull myself up against a wall. The virus is already making my body hurt. I can't and won't become one of them. The gun is easy to get to, which makes me happy. My last thoughts are of the world that used to be, full of joy, hope, and dreams. I have done what I could to protect this world. Take a break now. The sound of one gunshot can be heard all over the lab. It's like the ending of a long, scary sentence. It was boring to keep swiping left and right. Thanks for reading my story. My name is Mike, and I'm not writing about cute coffee shop dates or love letters. Each time I go through the grind of modern dating, I come out more skeptical than the last. The women I talk to, they didn't want a person, just a polished image. What about me? I think I was looking for something different. I wasn't always this way. I used to think there was a right one, but that was before I kept getting cheated on by the wrong person. When my third girlfriend cheated on me, I just snapped. I picked up a hobby that most people would look down on. I felt better when I planned to get back at the people who hurt me. I didn't do anything dangerous, but let's just say I made sure karma stopped by. But even getting even gets lonely. I longed for someone who knew what this dark desire of mine was. That's when I found the Darkweb, a part of the internet that even Google is afraid to go. The sun doesn't shine there. And there's a place for every weird and scary hobby, like a dating service for people like me. It was a website called Vindictimatch that said it could help you find the right partner for payback. The thought made me laugh. A dating service for people who want to get even. Either it was a brilliant idea or a step toward crazy. What did I have to lose? I moved my mouse over the join button and clicked it to join. The form was kind of creepy. It asked about my past relationships, my worst nightmares, and the ways I like to get even with people. I told the truth, telling this private service more about myself than I had told anyone in years. Then it asked me which tools I wanted to use. I thought for a moment as I held the ice pick that I kept in my desk drawer as a reminder of my last project. It was filled out on the form. As the days went by, I began to think that maybe I had been wrong. Then a match notice showed up. Her name was Pola, and her personal picture was a dark figure against a stormy sky. There was only one line in her bio: looking for someone to share in the thrill of justice. It felt like looking into a mirror when we started to talk. She had been lied to and had her own grudges to settle. The ice pick was also something she liked. Though cold and cruel, it was kind of poetic how the two minds were linked by anger. The talks between us got more personal, deeper, and darker. When we were young, we talked about the thrill of power and the feeling of being in charge. I felt a bond with that person that I never had with anyone from those matchmaking apps. It was fun to be with Pola. We chose to meet in real life and take our friendship to the next level. We planned our first date together, which helped us become closer. It was supposed to be her way of getting back at an ex-boyfriend who had hurt her so badly that she could never forgive him. The plan was very detailed, very harsh, and very good. Before our meeting, I couldn't help but feel a little excited as I lay in bed. It was a fresh start, a chance to be accepted and understood. I had no idea that it was also the first step on a road I could never go back from. As I waited for Pola's next message, the only light in the room came from my computer screen. The outside world was quiet after midnight, but a storm was building in my room. Pola had just told me about her most recent meeting, which was such a scary story that it made my own adventures seem really mild. As an artist, she used an ice pick to paint on the bodies of those who had hurt her. Since we hadn't talked in weeks, tonight felt different. As our shared dreams turned into plans, there was energy in the air and a sense that something was going to happen. When she typed, "It's time we meet," my heart jumped for joy. We were two hunters circling each other, and the thrill of the hunt made us both feel good. We agreed to meet at an unremarkable bar in the city center, where shadows hung on the walls, and whispers were the main form of payment. I got there early and waited with a whiskey in my hand. I knew her right away when she walked in. Her presence was like a cold front, chilling and impossible to avoid. Pola slid into the booth next to me. Even though it was dark, her eyes were bright. "Mike," she said, and the sound of her voice made my soul feel better. We didn't talk about the weather or other boring things. Instead, we talked about what we both loved. With every word, we took off the mask of politeness that society put on us. We came up with a plan as the night went on. It was Pola's idea to work together to make our relationship stronger. A half smile formed on her lips as she said, "There's someone who needs to be taught a lesson." It was clear this was personal from the way she talked about her husband. I was also happy to help. We worked out the details, with each of us contributing our own skills. We chose the ice pick as our instrument because it needed us to be close to each other. We carefully thought out our plans because we knew that accuracy was key in our hobby, because one mistake could mean a lifetime in prison. There was a promise at the end of the night, made with a touch that felt stronger than any contract. The cold night air felt full of possibilities as I walked her to her car. She spoke, "This is the beginning," and the lights in her eyes made them look like twin fires. The beginning of something beautiful. I saw her drive off, and her car's taillights went out into the night. Things had changed. It was no longer just something they did by themselves. Pola had become my partner in crime, my helper in the dark. Later that night, when I was in bed, the darkness didn't seem as heavy. It was like I had found a soulmate, someone who knew what was happening inside me. As I fell asleep, though, a thought kept coming back to me. "Huge when you dance with the devil." The city beneath the night was a world of prey and predators. The night was like a cloud. That made me feel good as I parked my car under a bridge. I was now one of the more recent ones. Pola was already there. She stood still and looked dangerous against the decaying cityscape. She asked, "Ready?" as I walked up to her. "Always," I said, happy that the ice pick in my jacket pocket was there to comfort me. We picked her ex-boyfriend Darren as our first shared project. He had hurt her badly enough that the law couldn't fix her. Tonight, we'd be the ones who judge, decide, and execute. It was an easy plan. When Pola tried to get Darren to leave, he told him that they would get back together at his house, which was where the memories of their old life were greatest. That's where we would face him and carry out our strange brand of justice. As we walked into Darren's run, down apartment building, which smelled like it had been ignored for a long time, I felt the line between reality and the dark dreams we'd been sharing become less clear. This was really taking place. We did this in real life. Pola told me that Darren's door would be open, and it was. He wasn't ready for us, but for her. He was in the living room with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses out in a hopeful, childlike way. When he saw that Pola had the ice pick in her hand, he looked confused and scared. He didn't have time to react because she was already on top of him, moving with precision and practice. I stood there for a moment, shocked by how ugly and real what we were doing was. Then I went with her. It was over very quickly because we were so angry and had planned our attack so carefully. Darren couldn't stand up to us too. It was colder than I thought it would be, and there was a lot of blood. I didn't think it was fair. It was awful. We cleaned up and tried to erase our presence as much as possible. We were very quiet as we left the flat, which was very different from the noise we had left behind. We both crossed a line, and we couldn't go back. I felt empty as we drove away because the energy that had pumped me up started to leave. I thought I would feel good about what I did, but instead I felt empty, like I had left a part of my soul in that room with Darren's dead body. If you couldn't read Pola's face, she was quiet. But the words wouldn't come out when I tried to talk about what we had done and think about it. We had become close because we both had dark sides. But now that they were out in the open, it felt like a huge gap between us. We said goodbye and promised to talk later. But as I watched her walk off into the night, I couldn't shake the thought that something had changed in a big way. I thought I knew what I was going into, but it turned out to be so much worse and more real than I thought. Yes, I was a hunter. After our last act, there was a void of silence that was filled with the ghosts of the decisions I made. To begin with, I thought that Pola and I were connected by our shared sadness. But as her messages stopped coming in and her mood changed, a chilling distance formed between us. Without anyone to talk to, I was left to wonder. The unity we had built was now breaking apart into pieces of doubt. I read through all of our old talks, eager to understand. That's when the contradictions started to stare back at me, mean and fun. Pola's stories, which used to bring us together, have turned into a web of lies. The cold truth hit me. I wasn't her partner. I was her tool. Inspired by a mix of anger and fear, I went deep into the dark web to find Pola's digital ghost. The crumbs she left led to a horrifying realization. Her past on Vindictamatch was a story of manipulation, with each ex-partner being a chapter that ended in tragedy. I was the last chapter in the story. The proof was very bad, and the story was carefully crafted to make me look like the bad guy. I was the bad guy, a victim ready to be killed. Fear gripped me hard, and I knew I had to turn around and face her to cut the rope she had around my neck. We ran into each other in the same dark bar where our strange story began. Her eyes flashed with surprise, then got darker when I told her she was lying. "You don't get it, Mike," she said in a sharp voice. "We're cut from the same cloth." But her words were like a snake's charm, and I wasn't going to give in any longer. I was a man looking for revenge, and she was a huntress who loved the thrill of the chase. There were a lot of claims and denials in the endgame. Pola's last move was to get rid of me, leaving me to bear the blame for our shared sins. But I still had one more move to make. She didn't know it, but I had written down all of her lies and tricks and made sure that the police were watching us. She charged with an ice pick in her hand, causing chaos that was a strange repeat of our past meetings. I hid because I had a deep-seated need to stay alive. But when the fight got really bad, the doors flew open and a lot of cops came in. They saw me, the ice pick, and Pola's planned weakness. There were so many flashing lights and cops yelling that the truth got lost. Pola did a great job as the victim, and I did a great job as the bad guy because I had the ice pick close by. The bands on my wrists were cold and tight. As they led me away, I saw Pola, her fake tears hiding a smirk. Her plan was now complete. I had lost the game. The cell is cold and the bars won't bend. I'm sitting here telling the story, which is a warning from the deep. As a man, I looked for connection in the worst places, but all I found was deception. I am the victim of a game I did not agree to play. This is my story to warn others about how dangerous the dark web can be. The harsh truth strikes me as the cell door slams shut, sealing my fate. I was never the hunter. I was always the prey. The city's core was like a sore that wouldn't heal. Tonight, it bled into the streets, smelling like anger and violence. Officer Rick Martinez here. The darkness I was about to enter wasn't just the lack of light. It was the shadow of death itself. Danny was a brother in blue who had been taken from this world by the cruel vipers. They thought that if they killed one of us, no one would find out and hit them back. They were not right. As a quartet of justice, we moved through the night in silence, even though our hearts were beating fast. The Viper's home was an old, run-down apartment building that stood out against the skyline like a gravestone. We were going to fix things here. The plan was easy. Just go in, catch the jerks who did it, and leave. But plans often fall apart when you least expect it. We snuck through the maze of trash, filled hallways, making noise with our steps and holding our breath. But fate can be just as mean as the streets of a city. It didn't matter what gave us away, a missed step or a floorboard that squeaked. When the Vipers caught us, they swarmed us like rats, their grins as sharp as the knives they were brandishing. Cold steel pressed against my wrists, and the click of the handcuffs told us all that we had failed. That's when they dragged us into a room that smelled like sweat and blood. The dim light flickered and made long shadows that made it look like it was making fun of our situation. We were all on our knees, with the cold gun barrels against our heads. I could hear Danny's words in my head, like a whisper from outside, telling me to stay strong and hold on. I thought about my family, the promise I made to serve and protect them, and the life I was about to leave behind. As I waited for the end, my heart was beating fast with sadness. After that, confusion broke out. There was a terrible noise that cut through the building as the walls shook. The door flew open, letting in all the worst fears. Dark creatures from the pits of hell, their eyes burning with hunger and their teeth gnashing with excitement. The Vipers were caught off guard by these new, bloodthirsty invaders, and for a moment, they forgot how cruel they were. The room turned into a painting of death as bullets flew and bodies fell. In the chaos, it was hard to tell the difference between law enforcement and lawbreakers. There was only one rule we could follow now. We had to stay alive. The animals didn't care about the badges we wore or the sins the Vipers carried. They saw us all as prey. The chains that held me down broke when something hit the Viper holding the keys. Even though my hands were free, that freedom didn't make me feel better. It only made me more determined to stay alive. When I lunged for a gun that had dropped, my fingers wrapped around the grip in a way that didn't feel good. When I shot, the gun made a loud noise that echoed through the room. People believe that the moment before they die should be peaceful, quiet, and full of thought. But when the head of the Vipers cocked the hammer on my service pistol, chaos broke out in the world. An awful roar filled the air. The walls shook, and the door to the dark room blew inward. They came in huge groups, hideous parodies of real people with their bodies twisted and their mouths wide open. The creatures looked like a nightmare, pulled from reality. Their eyes were wild with hunger, and their skin was hanging off their bones in tattered ribbons. Panic spread like a virus, much faster than the things did. The Vipers, these tough criminals who had just a moment ago been warning us of our death, were now screaming and shooting randomly. As the bullets flew through the air, they hit both the dead who wouldn't die and the living who were too slow to move. As I jumped to my feet, my adrenaline made the world tilt. It was the muscle memory from all the hours I spent training at the range, in the gym, and on the streets. I worked for the government, and if I had to die, I would fight. Something bared its teeth and lunged at my throat. When the smelly air passed by, I stepped back and slammed my hand into its head. It felt awful when the bone gave way, and I pushed the horrible thing away. The room around me had turned into a den of thieves. The Vipers fought back, but these things wouldn't give up. One of the bad guys, a kid no more than 19 years old, was pulled down and yelled at. I saw the life leave his eyes as his teeth dug into his skin. Form a circle, My voice could be heard over the noise as I yelled, "Back to back, aim for the head." Hearing the vipers was strange, but we were temporarily on the same side because we were both trying to stay alive. We stood close together, the living facing the dead. I took out the magazine, put it back in, and kept shooting. There were many of them, but we were resolved. 12 of them were put down for every one of us who fell, but they kept coming like a never-ending wave of death. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, Toro, the leader of the Vipers, gave me a smile. "Good plan, cop," he grunted, his voice rough from respect he got in the strangest way. Because we fought right after each other, the line between law and crime became fuzzy. The creatures seemed to feel our determination, and they thought for a moment before moving. Just that moment was enough for us. As some of the creatures turned to eat the dead, a way to the fire escape became clear. Move. We took a chance, tripping over bodies and broken things as we fought our way to the outside world, which seemed like a glimmer of hope. We jumped out of the room and onto the fire escape. The cold night air was very different from the hot and smelly room behind us. Things below us were like a war zone. There were fires, and the sounds of chaos rose up to meet us. The building would soon be full of people. We had to quickly move. As we went down the metal stairs, though, I knew the night wasn't over yet. We were in a fight for our lives because the creatures were everywhere. As we slid down the fire escape into the chaos below, it shook from the weight of our despair. The things were running through the streets like locusts, making the city look like a horror show. I really never believed in monsters, but reality has a way of breaking your dreams. I was with Toro, the leader of the Vipers. His face was a mask of stern determination. "We need a plan," he grunted, but it was hard to hear him over the screams and growls. My mind was racing as I nodded. "The precinct," I answered. "The fort is fortified and full of weapons. That's where we stand." When the thieves looked at each other, they saw that the blue wall of the law was now the only thing that was stopping the flow of death. They had to swallow a sour pill, but they had to in order to stay alive. The blue and striped soldiers moved together as a single unit. The things wouldn't stop, but we had something they didn't. A reason. Guns and stuff. A lot of guns. Even though the streets were a mess, I knew them inside and out. "This way." I yelled and led them through a maze of back streets and lanes. The body of the thing that jumped out of the darkness was a twisted mess of muscle and bone. I shot without thinking, and the bullet hit its target with a dark ichor splash. It fell, but 2 came up to take its place, making a hydra of blood and anger. It was like Thor had a shotgun in his hand. Toro was a natural force. Animal after animal fell, but it seemed like more would appear after each one. At the time, we were close to the police station. A bigger creature with arms that were all jumbled together came barreling into our group. It caught a young thug who couldn't have been more than 17 years old and tore into him so quickly and viciously that it was almost kind. The boy's screams went straight through me and made me remember why we were fighting. No longer was it just about staying alive. It was also about keeping our humanity in the face of this constant dehumanization. "We cover you! You get the doors open!" Toro yelled above the noise. I quickly ran toward the station while nodding. The keys to the armory were heavy in my pocket. The others put down a fire that stopped the enemy, and the rhythm of their shots emphasized our grim determination. As I got to the doors, things started coming at me while I fumbled with the keys. When the lock finally opened, I jumped inside and turned around to see other people fighting their way through. "Come on!" I screamed, afraid and excited at the same time. As they backed into the precinct, the animals snapped at their tails. The sound of us slamming the doors shut echoed like the last note of a requiem. The area was a tomb on the inside. The lights flickered, and the quiet was very different from the noise outside. For now, we were safe. But the battle was about to start. Toro walked up to me with his eyes wide. He said, "We'll hold them off as long as we can," and his voice showed that he kind of respected them. I looked him in the eyes and nodded. Together, I said out loud, "We made our position stronger by blocking doors, filling our weapons, and getting ready for the attack. The things would show up, but we would be ready for them. We needed to be." As we worked together, the line between police officer and offender didn't just blur. It went away. We were still alive, and we were going to fight the darkness together. The courtyard, which used to be a stronghold of order, had turned into our fortress in the end times. Every desk and chair had been turned into walls. The things outside scratched at the walls, and their howls kept reminding us that we were under attack. I put my trust in Toro and his Vipers. These men used to live without the law, but now I trusted them with my life. Our goal was the same, to see another dawn. We were no longer just friends. We were now comrades. As the night went on, the strikes got stronger. Something with horribly long arms crashed through a window. Its body was made up of muscle and jaws that were snapping. We fought back with a hail of bullets, and the beast's death throes were like a dance of the damned. But for every win, there was a loss. The Viper, a huge guy with a snake tattoo going up his arm, was taken. He fought bravely, but the monsters wouldn't give up. Even after he was gone, his screams could be heard, like a haunting chant that filled the space between attacks. Slowly, the hours went by until a thin line of light started to cut through the darkness. Dawn was coming up, and with it came a choice that made me feel very bad. "We can't stay here," I yelled, my voice getting rough. "We have to move." Toro nodded, but his face was sad. Today is the day of the stock run. Guns, food, and medicine in a truck. This is our best chance. The plan was dangerous. It was a mad dash for freedom that could kill someone or get them away. But they could also stay in this tomb of law and order and wait for the end. We got together the people who were still with us, loaded our guns, and got ready to make our stand. The animals could feel the change, and their cries got more desperate and angry. The front doors blew open, letting a flood of death through. When we shot, the gunpowder and blood filled the air, making it very loud. In all the chaos, Toro was hit, and his side got cut open. He fell and showed pain on his face. I could do something else. Either leave him to improve my chances of staying alive, or do what I knew was right. I made up my mind right away. "Cover me," I yelled and walked over to Toro. I carried him on my shoulder because I was ready to handle his weight. With every step we took, it felt like a fight, and every breath was a prayer. The delivery truck was in front, and the sound of its engine gave people hope. As more survivors joined us, the outside world became a blur of movement and fear. I pushed Toro into the back seat and slammed the door shut behind us. The station was getting farther away as the truck pulled away, and I looked at the man next to me. Toro, the criminal and head of the gang, nodded at me. It was a sign of respect that didn't need words. We had gotten away from death, but the world we were going into was going to be different forever. People in the New World Order would not only be the fittest, but also the most united. This meant that the union we had made would be put to the test. As the city went away, I understood that our fight to stay alive was still going strong. But right now, we were alive, which was the best win in the land of the dead. My tiny flat had only one light source, which was the screen. It cast long shadows on the walls. I got used to being alone and hearing my computer. It was the only thing that never changed in my life as an independent hacker. When I was going through my spam and junk emails that night, though, one letter stood out. It was encrypted, like a puzzle that begged to be solved. I got to work because I was interested. It was easy to crack, and it was a good way to warm up. Behind the security was a sleek and professional greeting that looked like it was made just for me. A black hat hacker contest that was kept secret and had a huge prize pool made my eyes widen. More than enough to pay off my bills. It was the dream of all hackers, a chance to show off their skills and get paid for it. As I leaned back in my chair, doubt began to creep in. Didn't it seem too good to be true? There were lots of scams and setups in the internet underworld. Still, the task and allure of the game made it impossible to say no. For years, I had been looking for crumbs behind fences and in other places where protection systems were in place. This could be my big break. The first job, which was kind of a test, came right on time. Hack into a company database. Nothing too fancy. They said it was a show of skill. I thought it was almost too easy at the time. I typed quickly on the keyboard, and the code came out like a second language. I was in and out in an hour, leaving no sign. I was right there at the top of the list. As I watched my alias move up the ranks, I felt happiness flow through me. As I sat in the digital night, I saw other people like me. I thought the job was easy and just a fun way to show off my skills. In that moment, I wasn't aware that it was the first step toward a world where morals would become less clear and where the stakes were very high. A thought of doubt crossed my mind as I turned off my computer for the night. What was the point of this? Who planned this contest? The questions kept coming up, but the chance to win was tempting, and I was already too caught up in the race to break free. As I fell asleep, thoughts of that prize pool kept dancing around in my head. I didn't know that I was just a pawn in a much bigger game. Not only would this game test my skills, but it would also test my morals. The ranking became all I could think about. It was a rush to finish each job, because being a ghost in the lines gave you that sweet, intoxicating power. The event showed that I was really, really good, but my stress level rose as the chores got harder. It all began with a simple theft of data. The directions say to infiltrate and extract. A private computer that held private data was the goal. It felt great to break through layers of security. Each wall came down because of my skill and will. The information came to me like water, and I felt like I could do anything. Things got worse with the jobs after that. Using blackmail. The word was cold and scary as it sat on the screen. To force people to do what I want, I was to use the stolen info. I had never crossed that line before. It was just another task, I told myself, and the end goal was worth the trouble. But the person I saw in the mirror started to look like someone else. The way my world started to twist and turn around me should have told me something. On the street edges, there were cars that no one knew. It was hard to hear my calls because of interruption. Are you paranoid? Could be. But on the dark side of the web, fear is just another word for staying alive. The contest kept me busy. I was falling through the air like a leaf into a deep spiritual abyss with every job. I told myself I was in charge and could stop whenever I wanted. But the truth was that the game was now up to me. I remember the night everything changed. The job was to change digital records so that some people's bills were erased and others were added. They told me to play God. I did. With just a few clicks of the mouse, people's lives and futures were changed. The power was both thrilling and scary. It became clear to me how bad what I had done was as I sat back. I had turned into the hand of fate, an unknown judge of good luck and bad luck. Why is that? Have money. Do you want prestige? The cost of getting lost in the game was getting too high. The next job, though, broke me. How many threads could I pull out of the fabric before it fell apart? The pointer flashed back at me like a dare as I stared at the screen. I had climbed so high and come so far, but at that very moment, I knew I no longer wanted to reach the top of that peak. As I moved away from the desk, the chair rolled back, making a sound that sounded like it could be heard throughout my apartment. It was time for me to get some fresh air and take a break from the television that had become my world. But I knew I couldn't go back as I stood at the window and looked out at a quiet city. I was different after playing the game, and there was only one way to end it. I went back to my desk, having made up my mind. When I was done with this last job, I would be done. I would leave the competition and the darkness. But it looks like the darkness wasn't done with me yet. The monitor's light was the only source of light in the room. It made long shadows that got closer with each hour. The jobs had become more dangerous, and each one was scarier than the last. It wasn't enough for me to just hack. I was also planning to cause chaos. The most recent job was to change how traffic is controlled in a city. The message said, "Make something distracting." It wasn't clear what it meant, but it was clear what it meant. I was supposed to make a real crash happen with real people and cars. My shaking hands were hovering over the keyboard. It was no longer a game. It was life or death. I tried to tell myself that it was just another puzzle to figure out or system to trick. But the truth made my stomach hurt like a stone. I was in charge of what next happened. I was about to pull the strings on the lines of code on the screen, which looked like puppet strings. The first crash was a sound I could feel through the floor, a faraway crunch that echoed through the city streets. Then another one, and another one. The chaos could be seen in real time on the traffic cams I had hacked into. In my thoughts, the screams and sirens were so loud that I couldn't hear them. It made me want to throw up, scream, and rip the computer off the wall to end it all. But fear kept me where I was. They were afraid of the unknown people who were behind the event and made it clear that there was only one way out. "You can't stop now," was the next task. A straight message. You need to finish what you started, or else the results will be personal. The danger was very clear, like the sound of a gun going off. I was told to get into a hospital's network and change patient records. It was crazy. It was impossible to imagine how bad things could get. Because I was afraid of what would happen if I said no, I moved forward. As I broke through the hospital's defenses, I felt like I was going down into a hole from which I could never come back up. I thought about the people whose lives I was putting at risk with every record I changed. People who would get the wrong medicine, have treatments on the wrong side, or be diagnosed too late, wouldn't get better. That was it. I fell asleep in my chair, a shell of the person I used to be. I no longer felt excited about hacking. Instead, I felt hollow and guilty, and it ate at my conscience. At that point, I knew I wasn't in the race anymore. The game was a trick on me, and it was pulling me deeper into a dark place from which I could not get out. I was now a player in a game with much higher stakes than I had thought. I knew it was time to break as I sat there in the dark with only the quiet hum of the computer for company. I had to decide whether to keep going down this path to disaster or figure out how to fight back against the forces that had caught me. But I quickly learned that some options are just tricks, and some traps are set so well that you can't get away without setting them off. The room was clean and cold, and the only sound was the clock clicking over and over again. The sound made me feel like someone was making fun of me. Every tick made me think of the time I had lost and would never get back. I was chained to the table by myself, and the taste of fear in my mouth was like metal. The last job was a superb work of trickery. They told them to break into the government server. Prove you are the best. And I fell into the trap like a moth to a flame, drawn in by the promise of success and freedom. I had worked very hard, and the keys, codes, and barriers would bend to my will as I pressed them. The screen went black when the last wall came down. The door had just slammed open, and the room was filled with agents. Their guns stood out against the light from my cameras. They didn't need to say something. The truth could be seen in their eyes and felt in the way they stood. I had been tricked. It was never about winning. It was always about getting clean. Every job had been a well-planned attack on the secret network of black hat hackers, and I was the sword they were using. Things started to make sense as I sat in the questioning room. The strange events and threats from people I don't know had been following me from the beginning, leading me down a road that had no end. The agent across from me was talking, but I couldn't hear him because I realized how dumb I was. He told her, "You were one of the best. It's a shame you chose the wrong side." Not the right side. The words kept playing over and over in my head. In this game, there was never a right side. It was a world of shadows, and morality was as changeable as the data streams I used to be in charge of. They made me an offer. If I complied, they would shorten my term. But when I looked into the agent's eyes, I saw the same cold calculation I had seen in the mirror not long before. The agent and I were not that different from each other. We both thought that the end was more important than the means. The badge was the only thing that was different. I thought about all the trouble I had made and the lives I had destroyed. Why is that? A prize that wasn't there, a title that didn't mean anything. Some people say that if you look into the darkness, it will look back at you. I hadn't just looked into the darkness. I had danced with it and wrapped my arms around it. Now that I was going to spend years in prison, the darkness was all I had left. They hadn't planned for one thing, though. As a hacker, I had a lot of information, which is like money in their world. They could lock me up, but they couldn't take away what I knew. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I started to think of a plan, a way to use what I had learned to make things better, not worse. When I woke up, there was a terrible quiet. The kind of silence that makes your heart beat fast to fill the gap. The ceiling lights were too bright, making my eyes fly open as if to make up for the lack of sound. I looked around and tried to remember how I got here. Yes, the surgery. It was an appendectomy, they said. It was meant to be normal. When I tried to sit up, a sharp pain in my side made me think of the surgery I had not long ago. When I reached out for the nurse call button, my hand didn't grab anything. When I looked down, the remote was lying on the floor. Odd. As I groaned and stretched to pick it up, I pressed the button over and over. No one showed up. It felt like there was nothing in the room, and every breath I took was too loud. As I swung my legs over the side of the bed, I felt dizzy all over. As I waited for the world to stop spinning, I tried to keep my balance. When it did, I saw that my things were nicely stacked on the chair across the room. Everything was still there. My clothes, my phone, and even my cheap watch. As I put on my clothes, my hands were shaking because the hospital gown felt like a veil I was eager to shed. Next was my phone. If I tapped the screen, it would light up, but the signal bars would not show anything. Not a network. I tried to text and call everyone, but every time they tried, they failed. I slowly and horribly came to terms with what I knew. I was by myself. I stumbled to the door and flung it open, half hoping to find a busy hospital hallway. There was nothing there instead. Nothing to hear but the squeaky wheels of a medicine cart and the moving of patients. There was only a long, empty hallway with strong, clean smell of antiseptic in the air. As I walked out the door, a chill went up my spine because the flooring felt cold under my bare feet. The quiet was so heavy that it felt like it was pressing down on my chest. Each step I took toward the nurse's station was shaky. The computers were on and had screensavers that were still not set. There were papers all over the place, and a coffee cup had been knocked over, spilling its dark liquid. Hello. In the empty room, my voice echoed and sounded strange. There was no answer, only the sound of my own fear. I walked down the hall, past rooms that were empty. The beds weren't made, and some of them had dried spots that I couldn't or wouldn't figure out. It looked like someone had just thrown a wheelchair away quickly because it was on its back. I then heard it, a faraway thump. My heart jumped into my throat. I stood still and listened carefully. It came back with a number of random thumps and then a dragging sound that went away and then came back. It was enough to make me run back to my room, where I thought I would be safe. I shut the door and took a few short gasps of air. The pain in my side was no longer important to me because I was too scared to think about it. What had taken place? Where were all of you? What was that sound, though? I climbed back into bed and pulled the sheets over my head like a child hiding in their closet from monsters. But deep down, I knew that the monsters I was hiding from were not the kind of things kids fear. They were real, and they had me locked up with them. While I was lying there, a distant thump broke the silence again. It was a warning that whatever was out there was still hiding in the dark. My heart seemed to beat in time with the darkness. Or maybe it was the other way around. I ran out of things to say. It felt like fear was in the back of my throat. I had to leave my room once more. I had to find anyone. It was scarier to think about staying put and waiting for help that wasn't coming than going into the unknown. As I slowly left my room, the door behind me creaked in a scary way. The hospital had always been very busy, but right now it seemed like a graveyard. The only sounds that broke the quiet were far away, strange noises that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Every step hurt my side, so I moved slowly. The pain was a harsh warning that I was weak and open to harm. The welcome area was a mess, with papers all over the place like there had been a storm. It looked like a child's stuffed animal was looking at me with one eye. The chairs were flipped over, and magazines were torn and lying all over the waiting room. There was still a TV on, and the screen was flashing with static. I reached out and turned it off. The sudden quiet made me jump. After that, the lights went out, if only once or twice, before throwing me into darkness. I stood still, and my chest hurt from holding my breath. It was very dark in the hallway because the emergency lights went on. It was just about enough to get by. I kept walking even though my steps were too loud. There were more and more clear signs of chaos. A bed was tipped over, and the sheets on it were caked with dried blood. I turned away because I didn't want to think about what could have happened to the person who was lying there. A soft crying caused my attention to be drawn to it. My heart was beating fast as I followed it. It took me to the church. Inside, the lights were still lit, and the shadows they cast across the room were beautiful. I walked in and heard the sound of whimpering stop. It turned out to be the wind blowing through a broken window. I could feel myself starting to cry. This is not likely to happen. Not this. Hospitals should be safe, full of life, and places where people can get better. The feeling of being watched crept over me as I left the church. I turned around, but all I could see was the empty, red-lit hallway. It was clear that there was going to be bloodshed as I went further. Doors were broken off their hinges, and the contents of a vending machine were stolen. The blood was all over the place. It was on the floor and on the walls. I slipped and hit the wall, and my hand was wet and red when I took it out. I got to the lifts and pushed the button, but it didn't work. There's nothing. The stairs back then. When I opened the door to the stairs, the metal clang sounded like a gunshot. The sounds got louder and clearer as I went down. I could hear things moving around and growling like something wet being dragged. Images I didn't want to see came into my mind. Horrible things I wouldn't let myself fully form. When I got to the first floor, I looked through the door's window. The lobby was wrecked, and the furniture was broken and strewn around. In the shadows, there were shapes moving too quickly to be people. As I moved away from the door, I let out sharp gasps of air. I had to hide and find a place to wait it out. Inside the administration building, there would be a place I could lock myself in. It was loud for me to hear my own movements, and the growling sounds behind me were getting louder. I was afraid to look back. I was unable to. I was sure I couldn't move again if I saw what was after me. When I got to the offices, I threw myself inside and locked the door by slamming it shut. As I slid down against it, my heart was beating fast, and my breath was short, for now I felt safe. Outside, though, the hospital had gone crazy, and I was stuck in the middle of it all. I sat with my back against the cold, hard office door. The darkness was like a shroud, heavy and smothering. The little light that got through the cracks looked like it was being sucked up by the shadows, dancing just outside my safe space. Every weak breath I took made me think of the surgery that had put me in this terrible place. I could not stay here. My mind kept going back to that thought, telling me to move and do something. Anything. As I cracked the door open, I could see a thin strip of red light from the emergency lights. The hallway seemed peaceful, but the silence was actually a threat, coming from somewhere in the hospital I couldn't see. I stepped outside, and the cold tile felt good on my bare feet. Each step made a soft thud in the otherwise quiet hall. The sounds from before were gone, and in their place was a silence that was scarier in some way. It was the quiet before the storm, or the deep breath before the jump. My hands were shaking as I moved forward slowly, my eyes darting to every shadow and flicker of movement. There were more obvious signs of chaos here. A gurney was lying on its side, and its wheels were still turning slowly. There were macabre streaks of blood on the wall, making it look like a grotesque work of art in the Hall of the Damned. I heard it then, the soft, wet sound of skin being torn, the crack of bone, and the low, guttural moans of something not human. Too close. I hid in a nearby room because my heart was beating so hard against my chest that it felt like it was going to burst. In the door's small, square window, I could see them. Their bodies were bent and broken, and they moved in ways that didn't make sense for their bodies. Their skin was a sickly pale color and was pulled tight over bones that stuck out. Their milky, dead eyes, on the other hand, were what held me hostage. I was hungry all the time. I tried not to gasp and quickly put my hand to my mouth to stop myself. One of them stopped and snapped its head toward where I was hidden. Its mouth was covered in blood, and pieces of meat stuck to its jowls. When it took a step toward me, my reflexes to stay alive went off. I slid deeper into the room and hid behind a curtain. My whole body was shaking. The scary thing was now at the door, wrapping its gross fingers around the frame. I prayed to a God I had never believed in while holding my breath. I was making a deal for a life I had not yet lived. The thing stayed for a moment longer, its head tilted as if it were confused, until a sound from down the hall scared it away. That sound saved me. I waited and counted every second and heartbeat until the stumbling, dragging steps stopped. When the quiet came back, it was different. It was filled with the sounds of the creatures. I knew then that I couldn't hide for much longer. I had to get away before they came back or found me. So I had to move. Even though my legs were weak, I came out from where I was hidden. My goal in light in the dark was the service exit. I got there by avoiding the main hallways and instead using the service rooms and back ways I knew from all the times I had been there before. But I didn't go right away when I got to the exit. The door was open, letting the night air in with the crazy sounds of the world outside. Along with the sound of sirens and fires, people were screaming in fear. That's when I realized the horror wasn't just in the hospital. Like a cancer, it had spread through the city and the world. I wasn't running away to safety. I was running away from a different kind of danger. I moved away from the door and found a hidden alcove where a vending machine used to be. It was a short break that gave me time to gather my confidence and thoughts. I chose to wait until the first light of dawn. The animals might have been afraid of the light. Could be. But in this new world, there were no sure things. The only harsh truth was that I was by myself, being chased, and a long way from safety. The hospital windows were dirty, so the first light of dawn came in as a gray whisper. I hadn't really slept. Every shade and sound had woken me up, making my heart race. But the dawn brought a weak courage and the will to stay alive in this place. I slowly crept out of my hiding place. My muscles were stiff and sore, and my side hurt all the time. The hospital was quiet now. The scary things that come out at night seemed to have gone back to their dark places. I went back to the service exit, but this time the door was still open, and I didn't know what was outside. That's when I heard him, a soft murmur and the sound of keys. The sound of another person's voice scared and excited me at the same time. I went after the noise and found a room for the cleaners. The door was only slightly open, and an old guy with a baseball bat in his hands was talking to himself inside. "Hello," I whispered and opened the door more. After being scared, he turned around with wide eyes. "Oh, thank God," he said in a low voice. I thought I was the only one left. He was a cleaner named Harold, and he was on the night shift when everything went wrong. He told me about the freaks that had come and how the hospital had become a mess. Along with me, he had hid in hopes of a miracle. I said, "We need to get out," and the alarm in my voice made it clear. He agreed, but his face was sad. There is a tunnel for maintenance that leads to the old boiler room. This is a way to get away from the big sites. They're still here, so we need to be careful. We came up with a wild plan to get away. I would follow Harold with my homemade weapon, a fire extinguisher in my hand. Harold would lead the way with his bat. Our path through the hospital kept us away from the main hallways, where the animals liked to hang out. It was smoky and crowded in the repair tunnel. People who get cramped would hate it, but it was our only way to get out alive. The boiler room was big and dark, and the boilers stood there silently in the darkness. Now we could see the way out, a metal door that led to the outside. We were really close. That's when the attack began. They were quick and quiet as they came out of the shadows. With a grunt, Harold swung his bat, and it hit the ball with a terrible crunch. I sprayed it with a fire extinguisher, and the cold blast stopped it in its tracks. We fought like animals in a tight spot, desperate and scared to death. The will to live drove our swings and thrusts, but there were too many of them, and they pushed us back into a corner. Then, with one last superhuman effort, Harold smashed a way to the door. We rushed through it and into the early morning sunlight. We kept running until the hospital was just a shadow in the early morning light. We passed out on the grass, our bodies hurting, but still alive, still alive. But as soon as we caught our breath, the sounds of chaos came through. Sirens, screams, and the clear groans of the animals. It had spread, and now the whole city was sick. We got out of the hospital, but the horror was still there.